Sarah Sands. Sarah Sands was a woman who made controversial headlines when she killed a convicted pedophile named Michael Plested. Sarah was a mother of 5 children, 3 of whom were young boys. In 2014, she discovered that her 3 sons had been sexually abused by Michael Plested, a 77-year-old man living in a neighboring block of flats in East London. Michael Plested was a convicted pedophile child predator who had changed his name from Robin Molt to hide his criminal past. At the time of his death, he was facing further charges of sexual offenses against young boys. However, when Sarah came to know of what Plested had done to her family, she took matters into her own hands. She went to Plested's home and stabbed him 8 times in what was later described as a determined and sustained attack. Plested bled to death as a result. Sarah Sands was subsequently arrested and went through a trial at the Old Bailey in 2015. She was convicted of manslaughter based on loss of control and was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. She had been released after only 4, though. Sarah Sands' sons, particularly Bradley, who was 20 at the time, expressed their support for their mother's actions. Bradley said, "I thought hats off when he learned that his mother had attacked Plested. The sons felt safer knowing that their abuser was no longer a threat, and they waived their right to anonymity to tell their story."
A 23-year-old dad, who was not identified by the news due to having been cleared of all charges, witnessed the unthinkable. He heard strange noises coming from a detached garage on his property, and when he went to go check things out, he found his 4-year-old daughter and a 47-year-old man named Jesus Mora Flores, who was attempting to abuse her. The young dad had hired the man to help him out on the ranch with horses. He could have never imagined that he was putting his young daughter in danger by bringing him around. As soon as he realized what was happening, the dad raced into action and began attacking Jesus as he worked to get him away from his daughter. In the process, the predator was killed. The father had not meant to kill the man and did call 911, as well as tried to administer aid himself to save his life. The county sheriff talked about what happened next.
During the course of him trying to rescue his daughter, he struck the individual several times, and the individual ended up dying. He had a remorse that the individual had died. I mean, it wasn't his intent. He was just protecting his daughter and doing what he thought he had to do to protect his daughter.
As word spread across the nation about what had happened, people had a lot of different opinions. But those who lived in the same area as the young father didn't blame him for what he did.
I would hope that after everything all came out that maybe this would be a lesson to the other would-be offenders that don't do it.
Especially with a 4-year-old. That's terrible.
The community made it clear that they were standing by this dad for doing what he had to do to protect an innocent child.
All the facts and stuff, but it's like, hey, you know what? Parts of the guy who just got up, so it's like, hey, it's his daughter.
Others came forward to say that if they found themselves in the same situation, they would act the same to protect one of their kids. While in court to determine whether or not the father would be prosecuted for the death of the predator, his 911 call was played aloud. He appeared to be very distressed.
Okay. This guy was my daughter, and I beat him up, and I don't know what to do. Okay. I need an ambulance to help me.
In the state of Texas, you are allowed to use deadly force in order to stop assault, which is what clearly happened in this case. The father was cleared of all charges. Do you agree with the decision not to prosecute him? Let us know in the comments. This next story took place back in 2000 in Mexico. Eduardo Gallo was the proud father of a beautiful young girl named Paola. He was heartbroken when she disappeared from their family home, seemingly without a trace. Things went from bad to worse when he received a phone call from gang members demanding to be paid a ransom if he wanted his daughter back, alive, safely. He desperately gathered as much as he could, which included over $1,800 and some jewelry, in hopes of getting his precious daughter back. Despite his efforts, the poor girl's body was found just 1 week later. She would have been wounded in both the neck and back. It's hard to imagine the fear she must have experienced as she lived her final days on Earth before she was... The bodies of several suspects supposedly connected to the murder were discovered, but it was believed that the killer was still at large. As time went on and justice had still not been served, Eduardo grew frustrated and decided to take things into his own hands. He ended up quitting his job and found a new purpose in life. What he wanted to do was quite simple. He wanted to figure out exactly what happened to his daughter, and he wanted to make sure justice was served. Day after day, month after month, he continued to dig for the truth. What he found was incredibly disturbing. The vast majority of kidnappings that occur in Mexico are never even investigated. His daughter was one of many victims. There were many family members out there who were in the same position he was, desperate to know what had happened to their loved ones. The more Eduardo researched, the more he realized just how badly his daughter's case had been botched. Fingerprints were never taken at the scene of the crime. The car used in his daughter's kidnapping was never tested for evidence. He continued to push law enforcement to take Paola's case, and those like them, more seriously. Finally, authorities were able to locate a suspect, a 28-year-old man named Francisco Zamora Arellano. He confessed to the murder and was apprehended. Even after finding out the truth, Eduardo continued to push for reform in hopes of helping others. How would you feel if you found out that the man who had tried to solicit your 4-year-old and 7-year-old daughters was caught, but didn't end up facing any legal consequences? That is the situation that Kenneth Faulkner, a father from Tennessee, found himself in the summer of 2015. Thomas Williams, who was 67 years old at the time of the incident, was given probation but no jail time for what he tried to do to these innocent girls. And guess what else? He was reportedly related to them through marriage, so they were his own family members. When Kenneth first suspected that something dark could be going on with Thomas, he called the authorities right away. Thomas was arrested and made bond the same day. When Kenneth learned that the man would not have to pay for what he did, he grew enraged and went to his house. He knocked on the door and demanded that he tell him exactly what he had done to his daughters. When Thomas refused to respond, Kenneth took things into his own hands. He attacked him, punched him repeatedly, and threw him down the stairs. The authorities were notified and Thomas was taken to the hospital, where he was expected to make a full recovery. Kenneth, however, was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. The court was pushing for Kenneth to spend 30 days behind bars, but received intense pushback from the community, who did not agree that the father should be charged at all. Some members of the community gathered to protest the court's decision to punish Thomas further. They held signs talking about the need for further protection of children. Kenneth also came forward to discuss how Thomas has taunted him ever since all of this happened, even allegedly smiling at him and winking at him while they pass on the street. What the court decided to do in terms of Kenneth's fate has not yet been made public, but one thing is for certain: he has a lot of people standing behind him to support him. The next story took place in West Palm Beach, Florida, and this father of a young daughter was not named for privacy of his daughter. It all started when a 13-year-old girl went to her mother and confided in her that something awful had happened. She had been terribly abused and assaulted on 3 different occasions by a 26-year-old man. That man was Roberto Rubio, who went by Salvador. The girl's mother immediately called 911 to inform the authorities. She then called her husband. Enraged, her husband left work right away to take care of the situation. Interestingly, he knew exactly who Roberto was. In fact, he was a family friend. He was someone they had not only trusted and allowed into their home, but had many meals with. This dad was not about to wait around for the police to take over. He went and combed through the town until he found Roberto on his own. The man was hiding from him in his truck. The father leapt into action and ended up injuring Roberto with a box cutter. But before he could do any further damage, law enforcement arrived at the scene. When they realized what was going on, they quickly intervened and arrested not only Roberto, but the father as well. Roberto was taken to the hospital, but later transferred to the county jail after being charged with 3 counts of assault upon an underage child. He later admitted that he had relations with the young girl, but that she had agreed to it, and everything had been consensual. The father was charged with aggravated assault against Roberto. He was later released on a $10,000 bond. He was supported by members of the community who said that his actions had been justified, as he had only been trying to protect his young daughter.
Richmond, August 18th, 2012. A mother of two out of Memphis, Tennessee beat her son's Little League coach with a baseball bat over claims that he molested him. Richmond said she launched her attack after her boys told her that they had been groped by their football coach, Tony Massey. She later told the police that she had asked her sons, "Did he touch you bad down there?" Her sons said yes, and also told her that he had done it to many other boys, not just them. At first, Richmond said that she tried to do the right thing by reporting him to the police. However, she flew in a rage and couldn't contain herself when she saw him at her son's football practice. Taking the law into her own hands, Richmond grabbed a bat from the trunk of her car and started chasing Massey. When she caught up with him, she just beat him repeatedly with that bat as he begged for her to stop. Massey was later found shirtless and bleeding from the head and face by police officers and was rushed to the hospital. Lakeisha Richmond with a huge grin in her mugshot. But she later did show remorse for what she did, saying, "I didn't intend to do whatever I did to him. I apologize. But I don't apologize for what happens to my kids." She continued, "During the beating, he was saying he didn't do it and that he was sorry. If you didn't do it, then why are you saying you're sorry? What are you sorry for?" Lakeisha was charged with aggravated assault. She spent a few days in jail but was later released. As for Tony Massey here, his apartment was searched by police, but nothing was found, and he hasn't been charged with any crime. Lori Palmer. Fall of 2000. Lori Palmer learned that Scott Phillips, a man she considered a close friend, had molested her daughter. At that time, Lori had hung up her badge and gun after a long and fulfilling career in the Wichita Police Department, where she had served in various units, including the Investigations Division. But even in retirement, she wasn't someone to mess with, and was ready to handle any trouble that came her way. Palmer had reasons to believe that Phillips was a pedophile, and that he was actively carrying out his evil deeds. What's more concerning was that he had two daughters of his own, and she believed he was a danger even to them. Armed with nothing but her rage, Palmer went to Phillips' workplace and, before he knew anything was wrong, she managed to convince him to go for a drive. By all accounts, it was a wild ride, a high-speed interrogation at about 80 miles an hour, ending in a remote field 20 minutes out of town, where Palmer, an ex-cop, started issuing orders. She told him to take off his clothes, and then she demanded answers. In response, a cold and naked Phillips confessed to fondling her daughter. Palmer was satisfied. As an ex-cop, she knew that with a confession, she'd probably get him taken off the streets. She was right. Phillips was arrested and charged with sexual assault after he repeated that confession to the police. But he wasn't the only one that was put in handcuffs that day. Palmer was also arrested and charged with kidnapping, with intent to commit first-degree murder. After Palmer's arrest, District Attorney Nola Falston called the ex-cop's action a vigilante rage-filled, anger-filled pursuit of an individual. But she knew not everyone would see Palmer as a criminal. Looking at this as any citizen would, somebody would say, "Well, you go, girl. You take that child molester out to the country, strip him down naked, and get a confession from him. That's great, but that's not the law." However, Palmer remained steadfast in her decision, saying that she simply acted as any concerned parent would. She also said she felt a hit in the gut because she considered him a close friend. Palmer had been best friends with Phillips' wife, Kayleen, since childhood, and had been maid of honor at their wedding years ago. Palmer's daughter, Eden, frequently slept at the Phillips residence when Palmer worked nights. So when Kayleen told her Scott was having explicit conversations with a young girl on the internet, Palmer became concerned and feared that Phillips might have done something to her daughter. In a conversation every mother dreads, Eden told Palmer that Phillips had sexually assaulted her several times. Outraged, Palmer asked to meet Kayleen and told her, "Well, I wasn't going to tell you. I was just going to kill him. And then you could have the insurance money and I would feel better and we'd be done with it." Yet as an ex-cop, Palmer initially tried to do the right thing by going to the police. Unfortunately, they only added to her mounting frustration. as they told her to make a report and wait for him to do something. But Palmer was in no mood to wait. She left the police station and within an hour picked up Phillips on her own and got that confession out of him. Later, she defended her action by saying, "I just found out that my daughter had been hurt. The people that I counted on to help me weren't going to help me. And there were going to be more kids hurt if something didn't happen and happened soon." Now, before his trial, Phillips got out of jail on $50,000 bail. But Palmer stayed behind bars because her bail was set at 5 times that of Phillips, $250,000. Palmer's bail was eventually reduced, and she was placed under house arrest until her trial. If she would have been found guilty, she would have spent at least 5 years in prison. But fortunately for her, after 3 months of house arrest, Palmer's kidnapping charges were dropped, and she pled guilty to lesser charges, including making a criminal threat. For that, she received 12 months probation. On the other hand, Phillips pled guilty to a reduced charge of felony fondling and was given a 4-year sentence. In the end, Palmer admits that what she did was against the law. Nevertheless, she still asks, how many kids do we have to sacrifice to the rule of law? And this brings us to our next mother, who also decided the law wasn't enough and got rid of her son's molester for good. Sarah Sands.
This is 32-year-old Sarah Sands. In a few moments' time, she will stab a man to death with a knife that she is carrying underneath her clothing.
November 2014, Sarah armed herself with a knife, and she stabbed Michael Plested 8 times after her sons told her that he had sexually abused him. This pedophile, living in the block of apartments that neighbored the family's duplex in Canning Town, East London, had previously been convicted for several child abuse offenses. Robin Molt had served time in prison for his heinous crimes, but after he got out, he changed his name to conceal his past and managed to become a well-known community figure who ran a bric-and-brac shop. This is why Sarah saw no reason not to trust her 77-year-old neighbor, whom she treated like a father. She would enjoy chatting and cooking meals with him, and thought it'd be a good way for one of her sons to earn some money when Plested had offered the young boy a job in his shop. But everything would change when she discovered his dark past. She learned that he had been accused of molesting 2 boys and was on bail awaiting trial. Police were investigating a further allegation that he even abused a 3rd boy. After more digging, Sarah also discovered Plested's real name, Robin Molt, and this led her to uncover his previous crimes, which were a string of convictions for assaulting boys between 1970 and 1991. Sarah was naturally terrified that he had harmed her sons. However, when she asked him if anything had happened, he denied it. Sarah didn't believe him, and she decided to ask her sons if Plested had done anything to him. November 28, 2014, after talking to her sons, the youngest broke down and admitted that he had been sexually abused by Plested. Sarah was horrified and decided to confront this man, but she ended up stabbing him 8 times and watched him as he bled to death. After realizing what she had done, she had called the police and turned herself in. She was given manslaughter on the basis of losing control. At her trial, Sarah would sob in the witness box, insisting that she had not meant to hurt Plested when she went to his apartment that night. But she had drunk a bottle of brandy and was only seeing red. She told the jurors that she had tried to reason with him and get him to admit to his crimes to spare his victims the trauma of having to go to court and recount everything he had done to him. But when Plested ignored that request and smirked, telling her the boys were all liars who had ruined his life, well, she snapped and ended up killing him. Sarah was eventually sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. However, that sentence was later increased to 7.5 years by the Court of Appeal judges in London, who deemed her initial sentence to have been too lenient. 2018, Sarah was released after serving nearly 4 years in jail, and is now campaigning for a tightening of the rules on sex offenders being allowed to change their names. In an interview, she stated, "I did what any mother would do, because he did this to my son, my little boy. I never dreamt I'd be capable. I have no pride in it, but at least..."
And Lupe Mercado, July 2012. Barry Gilton and his partner Lupe Mercado decided to take matters into their own hands upon learning their daughter was involved with and being abused by a pimp. So how does this story unfold? Barry Gilton grew up on Central Avenue, which fell within the territory controlled by the Central Divisadero Players, one of the prominent rival gangs in that district. Although some of Barry's extended family members were associated with the CDP, he never actively engaged in their criminal activities or became a gang member himself. Eventually, Barry moved away and started a family with his partner, Lupe Mercado, raising 4 children, including their daughter, Leticia. Trouble found Leticia when she decided to move to LA. There she became involved with Calvin Sneed, a pimp. At first, Sneed deceived her by pretending to be in a romantic relationship with her. However, he soon resorted to threats and violence to keep her trapped in the world of prostitution. Barry and Lupe were devastated when they discovered the horrifying truth about what Sneed had done to their daughter. They desperately tried to convince her to return home to San Francisco, but she stubbornly refused to leave Sneed's clutches. Frustrated and fearing for their daughter's safety, Barry made a life-altering decision. He reached out to his cousin, Antonio Gilton, and his friend Alfonso Williams, both members of CDP, seeking their help in eliminating Sneed. June 4th, 2012 wasn't a good day for Sneed while he was on his way to pick up Leticia. Out of nowhere, an SUV pulled up next to his car and the people inside were armed with at least 2 guns. Chaos ensued when they started shooting at his car, causing him to lose control of his Corolla and crash into a parked van at the top of the street. Initially, California authorities charged Barry and Lupe with the murder. However, just before their trial, the U.S. Attorney decided to indict him under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, and the Violent Crimes in Aid of Racketeering Act, also known as VICR. This unexpected twist meant that Barry and Lupe ended up spending 5 to 6 years in federal prison before their trial even began. The prosecution had to prove that Barry and Lupe had agreed to help with the criminal enterprise, but the evidence didn't cut it. The prosecution's arguments were all based on guesswork, instead of solid evidence showing Barry's intentions to back up the gang. So it totally made sense for the district court to let Barry and Lupe off the hook in this racketeering case. However, they were charged and convicted of being accessory to murder. Number 2. Marianne Bachmeier. March 6th, 1981. Marianne unleashed a hail of bullets in a packed courthouse in what was then West Germany. Her target? A 35-year-old criminal standing for the brutal murder of her daughter. He died after taking 6 of her bullets. Immediately, Marianne became an infamous figure. Her subsequent trial, closely followed by the German public, raised a burning question. Was her quest for vengeance justified in the face of her child's senseless murder? Fast forward 40 years, and the case still lingers in the collective memory as the most spectacular example of vigilante justice in post-war German history. But before she earned the moniker Germany's Revenge Mother, Marianne Bachmeier was an ordinary struggling single mom, trying to make ends meet by running a pub in the 1970s. May 5th, 1980. Marianne's world was shattered when her beloved daughter was discovered lifeless. On that tragic day, this girl decided to skip school after a heated argument with her mother. Little did she know she would end up in the clutches of her 35-year-old neighbor, Klaus Grabowski, a local butcher with a dark past involving child molestation. As investigators later discovered, Grabowski had kept the young girl Anna at his home for several hours before he tragically ended her life by strangling her. The extent of any other abuse she may have suffered remains unknown, but Grabowski's atrocious act was quickly discovered as his fiancée alerted the police that very evening, leading to his swift arrest. Although he confessed to the murder, he denied any abuse. Instead, Grabowski spun a bizarre and disturbing tale. According to the killer, Anna had attempted to blackmail him, seducing and threatening to accuse him of molestation if he didn't give her money. Marianne, Anna's mother, was outraged by this twisted story. A year later, when Grabowski stood trial for the murder, she decided to take her long-awaited revenge. During the 3rd day of the trial, Marianne managed to sneak a Beretta 70 into the courtroom. She used that weapon to fatally shoot Grabowski. With precision, she aimed that gun at his back and pulled the trigger 7 times. 6 of those shots found their mark, instantly ending his life. Marianne then calmly lowered her gun and surrendered without any resistance, and ultimately found herself on trial for murder. During the trial, Marianne testified that she had dreamt of shooting Grabowski and even claimed of seeing visions of her beloved daughter in the courtroom. In her own words, she said, "I did it for you, Anna." 1983. The court ultimately convicted Marianne of premeditated manslaughter, sentencing her to 6 years behind bars. September 17, 1996. Marianne Bachmeier passed away at the age of 46 after a battle with cancer. She was laid to rest beside her precious daughter, Anna. And number 1. Gary Plauché. March 16, 1984. Gary Plauché was anxiously waiting at the airport. His son Jody had been kidnapped by a man named Jeff Doucet. And on that day, Gary shot Jeff dead right in front of the cameras. Before any of this happened, Gary had led a relatively ordinary life. He had served in the U.S. Air Force for a short time and then worked as an equipment salesman. He even dabbled in camera work for a local news station. Nothing too crazy, just a regular guy trying to make a living. But then, everything changed. February 19th, 1984, something unimaginable happened to Jody Plauché, an innocent boy. His karate instructor, Jeff Doucet, offered to take him for a quick ride. Jody's mom, June, didn't think twice about it. After all, Doucet was a trusted member of their community and had been teaching karate to their kids for a while. Little did June know that Doucet had ulterior motives. Instead of a short joyride, he took Jody on a bus all the way to the West Coast. Along that way, Doucet decided to change their appearances. He shaved his beard and dyed Jody's blonde hair black, hoping to fool anyone who might be looking for him. They ended up near a cheap motel near Disneyland in Anaheim, California. But this wasn't a fun vacation. Inside the motel room, Doucet did something terrible. He assaulted Jody, his own student. Eventually, Jody mustered up the courage to ask Doucet if he could call his parents. Surprisingly, he allowed it. Jody's parents wasted no time and immediately alerted the police. They traced that call, managing to apprehend Doucet. Meanwhile, Jody was put on a flight back home to Louisiana, finally safe from his captor. Despite finding his son, Plauché couldn't shake off his unease. He spent the next few days held up in a local bar called the Cotton Club, anxiously asking anyone if they could find when Doucet would be brought back to Baton Rouge for trial. By sheer luck, a former WBRZ news colleague was there, informing Plauché that the disgraced karate instructor would be flown in at 9:08 a.m. Plauché wasted no time, heading straight to the Baton Rouge airport. Disguised with a baseball cap and sunglasses, he entered the arrivals hall, concealing his face. Making a quick call from a payphone, he noticed the WBR news crew preparing their cameras to capture the moment when Jeff would be escorted off the plane by a caravan of cops. As they passed by, Plauché swiftly retrieved a gun hidden in his boot and fired a fatal shot into Doucet's head. The WBRZ crew managed to capture the chilling moment on camera, and the footage has since gathered over 20 million views on YouTube. It shows Doucet collapsing while Barnett, a police officer, immediately tackled Plauché against the wall. During the chaos, Barnett shouted at his friend, demanding an explanation for his actions. Through tears, Plauché responded, "If someone did that to your kid, you'd do the same." While Plauché had taken the life of a child molester, the law still considered it murder. He would face trial, uncertain if he would walk free or be imprisoned. Initially charged with second-degree murder, Plauché eventually agreed to a plea bargain, pleading no contest to manslaughter. The court sentenced him to a suspended sentence of 7 years, along with 5 years of probation and 300 hours of community service, which he completed in 1989. Before he had completed both, Plauché was already back to living a relatively normal life under the radar.